What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal here in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with my colleague and friend, Aaron Mate, uh, in witness protection. And we're live on Rockfin as well. I wanted to call I should have called like an emergency stream or something, just because I'd never felt so vindicated before. Well, I mean, I not in such an instantaneous way. It's always this gradual process of vindication. But in this case, it was like the mainstream media was saying what we've been saying for years, since 2014. Well, maybe they haven't quite come around to the contemporary Nazism. Aaron, what were your initial thoughts and reactions when you saw what which now astounds the world? On September 22nd, Canada's Parliament, while hosting another Zelensky panhandling session, honored with a standing ovation, a rapturous standing ovation, a veteran of the Ukrainian Nazi Waffen-SS Galicia division from World War II, one of the last living veterans in Canada, Yaroslav Hunka. What were your initial reactions?
First of all, since you raised the issue of the Grayzone being vindicated, you really could make like a top 50 times the Grayzone's been vindicated and talked about the Grayzone being vindicated, because this does happen a lot. But it's interesting that it has to happen on this issue, because you shouldn't, of all the issues that are like no longer controversial in North American culture, Nazism is supposed to not be controversial. Everybody agrees the fact of the Nazi Holocaust happened. Everybody agrees that Nazism is bad. But yet our propaganda system is so powerful and the devotion to U.S. hegemony is so strong that when our government decides that they're going to ally with Nazis as part of a long historical legacy, actually, of protecting Nazis, which goes back many, many years, including in Canada, all of a sudden it becomes off limits. And when the Ukraine proxy war escalated with Russia's invasion, all of a sudden you couldn't acknowledge anymore that historically, not just in the last 8-9 years of the post-Maidan coup era, but for a long time, there's been this alliance between the West and the followers of Bandera in Ukraine, which includes a neo-Nazi contingent. And it took this standing ovation for a literal Nazi to break the taboo on that. Because, you know, you look at the apologies from the Canadian lawmakers, this is the first time I can recall, I mean, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, since Russia invaded, that there's been any kind of apology or reckoning whatsoever with the heavy neo-Nazi contingent inside of Ukraine. And albeit in this case, it came with a veteran of the Nazi forces in World War II. But still, it did force a reckoning with who we're still currently supporting today, because the followers of units like the Waffen-SS are now still fighting in Ukraine, and we're still arming them, as the Grayzone's been reporting on for many years. So
yeah, I mean, it's because of the lack of scrutiny or the refusal to the deliberate denial of Nazism in contemporary Ukraine that the Ukrainian state, which is basically a client of the US, is sponsoring militant battalions which are centered around Nazi ideology, like the Azov battalion. The deliberate denial, I mean, article after article after article, and while hiding behind Zelensky's nominal Jewishness, that they felt entitled and emboldened to honor an actual World War II era Nazi, back when Nazism was said to be bad. I think they thought they could just so easily get away with it. And you know, and we'll get into this, Chrystia Freeland knew who he was. They read out his background. And if I was there, I would have instantly known it, and I would have jumped up and interrupted the whole thing. Like, you're honoring a Nazi. What are you doing? Are you crazy?
The speaker literally said he fought the Russians during World War II. So if you fought the Russians during World War II, that means you also fought against Canada, and you also fought against the US, because these were the allies that fought the Nazis. So the fact that this whole chamber got up and applauded this guy, somebody must have, I mean, I don't expect all of them to make that leap, because people are dumb and they don't let their brains make the obvious conclusions, but some people must have realized whose side he was on. And amazingly too, part of this history that gets erased in the process is that many, many more Ukrainians fought on the side of the Soviet Union because they were against Nazism. So this idea even that Ukrainians were in a tough position because they were caught between Nazis and the Soviet Union, and so they had to make a choice. I mean, the Nazis were their best option against Soviet tyranny. Millions of Ukrainians, many more people than fought for the Nazis in Ukraine, made the choice to fight with the Soviet Union. But all that, again, because now Russophobia is just the dominant trend, people can't make that connection in their heads, and they can get up and literally not only applaud someone who fought with Nazis, but fought against the Canadian side. I mean, that's how ridiculous this whole thing is.
Well, Alex Rubinstein made a video that I think captures the insanity of the past 2 years and the whitewashing of Nazism. I'll start kind of in the middle, but it really starts with just all the whitewashing behind the Zelensky washing, and it'll provide you with the scene inside Canada's parliament.
Zelensky is Jewish.
If Putin is to be believed, his intention is to demilitarize the country and denazify it, which is a ridiculous term.
His terminology, outrageous and obnoxious as it is, denazify. Where, you've got frankly a Jewish president of Ukraine, and Mr. Zelensky.
In explaining why he was going to invade, he said, you know what? I'm going to denazify Ukraine. I mean,
look, it's the height of hypocrisy to call the Ukrainian nation to denazify it. Their president is Jewish, after all.
He says that he's working to denazify the country. He's talking about Nazis in Ukraine right now. President Zelensky, as you know, he's Jewish.
It's patently absurd. There's really no merit. You pointed out that Vladimir Zelensky is Jewish. The Jewish community is embraced. It's central to the country, and there is nothing to this Nazi narrative, fascist narrative. It's fabricated as a pretext.
What a compelling
Holocaust
commentator and figure.
Here in Washington, they condemn Putin for uttering those kinds of words.
There's Zelensky meeting with the neo-Nazi C-14. There he is giving an award to the head of Right Sector. Grayzone, baby. We've been doing this since 2014. There's Zelensky meeting with Andrei Beletsky, the founder of Azov. He said, "How can we describe our enemy? The Judeo-Bolsheviks. Race is everything for nation building. Race is the basis on which infrastructure grows."
Today, Ukrainian Canadians, Ukrainian Canadian world veteran,
Canadian speaker Anthony
from the
Rota.
Second World War, who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened.
Yeah, it's just upsetting. You thought you could get away with it. Trudeau's issued directives to his aides, that initially issued directives to just ignore it, that it would go away, because it had gone away before. But this time, something snapped. And it was largely thanks to the opposition media, the opposition political parties, the Conservative Party, that this got out there. But they were clapping for him too. The Conservative Party under Stephen Harper, they supported, their foreign ministry supported neo-Nazis during the Maidan coup when they invaded City Hall in 2014. The C-14 neo-Nazi hooligans and festooned the walls with Nazi swastikas, with a Confederate flag, with the Celtic white power symbols and Bandera posters. When they were chased out by riot police, they fled to the Canadian embassy because Canada had an official policy of protecting them, just as they had an official policy of protecting Nazis after World War II, which we'll get into. But Aaron, I mean, we should react to Justin Trudeau's apologies because they're amazing.
They are. So as you said, this was reported that in a private meeting with lawmakers, he urged people not to talk about it because it was so embarrassing. And by the way, we have to credit the people responsible for getting this out. Ivan Kaczynowski, University of Ottawa professor, who we've interviewed before at the Grayzone, Ukrainian Canadian scholar. He's faced all kinds of repression in Ukraine. He had assets seized. And what's his crime there? He's been
he's had his peer-reviewed papers censored.
He's been censored. And for what? Because he's been diligent in exposing the neo-Nazi movement inside Ukraine since 2014. And his work includes, many important texts, but one of his most important papers is a thorough examination of a pivotal event in the Maidan coup called the Maidan Massacre, where right before the coup of 2014, there was a massacre in Maidan Square where snipers shot and killed a whole bunch of people. And immediately, Yanukovych, who was then the president, was blamed by the US and their allies. And this led to a chain of events that led to basically more violence that forced Yanukovych to flee. And the change of a regime happened. The regime change happened. And when this was justified, one of the things that's said is, well, Yanukovych's forces committed this awful massacre of Maidan protesters. But Ivan Kaczynski have shown, based on witnesses, based on the forensic evidence, based on videotapes, he's spoken to a lot of people. He's also noted the fact that there's been almost no prosecutions at all inside Ukraine, which is very, very odd, that all the evidence shows that the snipers were on the pro-Maidan side. And there's it's exhaustive, all the work he's done. And so for doing that, for undercutting this key piece of propaganda used to justify the coup and the ensuing proxy war, he's been marginalized and subject to all sorts of vicious attacks. And because he's been consistent in not forgetting the legacy of Nazi victims, he called this out immediately on Twitter. He pointed out who this Nazi veteran was, and that set off a firestorm. And then Lev Galinkin, who's also done so much work on this since 2014 about the powerful far right inside Ukraine, he also wrote an article for the Jewish Daily Forward calling attention to this. And that set off this crisis that Justin Trudeau did not want to address, but now he's been forced to.
Well, yeah. And it's been independent media and independent academics like Ivan who've been calling this out from the beginning. We'll highlight more of that when we get into Chrystia Freeland's record. But Justin Trudeau and his administration since the beginning have been blasting them all in McCarthyite fashion as Russian propagandists for telling the truth about Nazis. So here's Justin Trudeau's first reaction.
It's extremely upsetting that this happened. The speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and by extension to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are celebrating commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
Further measures.
It's like he's in a cult. It's like he's in a cult where you're just programmed to just repeat Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation.
He is.
These are like all-powerful, unquestioned evil forces that just exist and that require no evidence at all to actually substantiate you. They just exist. It's like believing in a higher power, Russian disinformation. And of course, the implication here is that somehow Russia was responsible for getting Justin Trudeau and his Canadian colleagues to applaud a Nazi, that somehow Russia's fault.
That they smuggled in this nonagenarian Nazi and then, had the Queen of Hearts hypnotized Trudeau and all of his colleagues Manchurian candidate style into clapping for him. That's one implication. But the other kind of what Trudeau is trying to do is a form of hypnosis that has succeeded with so much of the public, particularly his base in the media. And what he's saying is, if you report on this, you are playing into Putin's hands. You're participating in Russian disinformation. You're helping Russia. So just don't. He's sending them the hypnotic signal, when he's throwing up the Queen of Hearts and saying, just keep silent about this because Putin is lurking. Loose lips sink ships. And it didn't work. Because people have had enough and this nonsense has been going on for too long. And then he does it again in his second apology, which was hilarious. I guess it's already on screen. So you're quicker with the pistol than me.
In a few moments, I will address the House in front of all Canadians, in front of Jewish people here and around the world, and Ukrainians, to offer Parliament's unreserved apologies for what happened on Friday. The Speaker was solely responsible for the invitation and recognition of this man and has wholly accepted that responsibility and stepped down. This was a mistake that has deeply embarrassed Parliament and Canada. All of us who were in this House on Friday regret deeply having stood and clapped, even though we did so unaware of the context. It was a horrendous violation of the memory of the millions of people who died in the Holocaust, and it was deeply, deeply painful for Jewish people. It also hurt Polish people, Roma people, 2S LGBTQI+ people, disabled people, racialized people, and the many millions who were targeted by the Nazi genocide. Every year, there are fewer Holocaust survivors to share firsthand horrors of what they experienced, and it is therefore incumbent upon us all to ensure that no one ever forgets what happened. I also want to reiterate how deeply sorry Canada is for the situation this put President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation in. It is extremely troubling to think that this egregious error is being politicized by Russia and its supporters to provide false propaganda about what Ukraine is fighting for.
Well, I certainly am relieved that he apologized to Jewish people, Polish people, Roma people, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people. No, sorry, 2SL LGBTQI+ people. But I'm deeply offended that he didn't apologize to 2SL LGBTQIA+ people, because asexuals were offended as well and deserve to be part of that quadratic formula. And now that we've apologized to all of them, as well as racialized people, I think we need to get back to the business of killing lots of Russians. It's the best money we've ever spent. And censoring people that Trudeau says have unacceptable views and seizing their bank accounts. Because, I mean, that's what liberal Democrats do.
That's the key point, right?
One person who didn't accept responsibility, Aaron, was Justin Trudeau.
Well, exactly. And that's the key point. But notice in his apology, he apologized to everybody except for Russians. The Soviet Union lost like 27 million people to the Nazis. I mean, who knows the exact figure, but that's one estimate. 27 million people, at least millions of people. Country was decimated. They paid the biggest
10 million during Operation Barbarossa.
Yeah, I mean, of all the countries in the world, by far the biggest sacrifice to defeat the Nazis. And yet he's such a Nazi apologist. He's such a Russophobe that he can't even apologize to Russians because they don't count, to him. And they also don't count because they're currently fighting a Ukrainian military that, whether Justin Trudeau wants to admit it or not, does have a neo-Nazi contingent in its armed forces. I don't agree with the Kremlin line that it's a Nazi regime. You don't have to accept that to point out that there's a huge neo-Nazi element inside Ukraine that is very influential. And yeah, it isn't everybody in the government, but is a sizable force. And Justin Trudeau knows that and is embarrassed by it because, as you pointed out, there have been instances, and I know this from the Grayzone, from the reporting you've done, when Canada has deleted photos of their military trainers meeting with the Azov battalion, right? Going back many years.
Yeah, let me bring that up, actually.
And it was reported that there was even some internal documents in the Canadian government talking about how they were worried about this getting out, that they did not want the public to know that they were actually training and meeting with Azov because of the fallout. And so they've been trying to cover up. And Justin Trudeau knows that, yet he has the gall to go and say that and suggest that still that Russia is putting out false claims about Ukrainian ties to the Nazis. This is the face of the Ukrainian government right now, is people in the armed forces who worship people like the same Nazi that the Canadian government applauded.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Azov battalion founded by Andrei Beletsky, who was honored by Vladimir Zelensky several weeks ago, who said that the mission of Azov was to wage a holy crusade on behalf of the white races against the Semite-led Untermenschen. And here's an American officer giving, you can see the patches there, and Azov, they're kind of exchanging a patch. I think they're exchanging patches, or I don't know what, or he's showing him like, hey, did you see these skulls of Iraqis that I found? Yeah, they're exchanging insane patches. Like, look at that. What's going on there? That looks like fascistic. You have Canadians as well. And Azov was asked to delete this. And it's kind of like with Justin Trudeau. He's the more effective patron of Nazi battalions because he's able to rattle off the rainbow political talking points, and he's able to apologize to racialized people. I mean, can you imagine if a right-wing leader did this, or if like Donald Trump was caught doing this? How American media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Financial Times, they've basically swept this thing under the rug. How they would react? It would be front page. I mean, it's basically thanks to like some corporate run conservative publications that it's having any traction at all, but it's definitely outraged regular people all over the world. The Polish Minister of Education has demanded the extradition of Yaroslav Hunka. So, I mean, if you don't think it's like disgusting that Justin Trudeau is deploying rainbow politics here, you have completely lost the plot and you don't understand what's happening. How liberalism in the West is actually the more effective steward of sponsoring jihadi factions in Syria or fascistic neo-Nazis in Ukraine as proxies to dissolve the Russian Federation through violence. It's because they seem so dissimilar from them that they can't possibly be backing them. But this is what's been happening since the 1950s. And the number 2 in charge in Canada, Chrystia Freeland, we should watch her reaction. She is a product of that policy, and she is a hardcore social liberal and fanatically neoconservative on foreign policy. And her history is actually fascinating. And
as you pointed out, when there was that Canadian trucker protest a few years ago against mandates, it was Justin Trudeau who was literally calling them Nazis, right? Because some random people were seen with flags with swastikas on them. But as I understand, even those people were not trying to support Nazism. They were trying to compare the pandemic measures to Nazism, to fascism. That was the use of those Nazi flags, regardless whether they were.
Well, wait a minute. Sorry to interrupt, but there was just one guy with a mask on and a Nazi flag who was running around, and it looked like he was there just to implicate them. And then the whole media focused on that.
Right. So he calls them. So then, based on that,
these are people with unacceptable views. And then he and Chrystia Freeland proceeded to shut down their bank accounts.
Yeah.
They tried to seize their GoFundMe, which set the stage for the suspension of ours. They declared emergency law, sent in the federal police with truncheons and tear gas, and cleared Ottawa of this protest, which finally broke Canada's COVIDian regime. And that was a huge blow to Justin Trudeau, but he got away with it there. And then like a few weeks later, it was like one psyop shifted to the next. Once they broke the mandates and the lockdowns, and it just started all falling apart across the West. And then it was like the Ukraine proxy war started, and Chrystia Freeland appears in Toronto at a Ukrainian nationalist gathering, against Russia's invasion. And she grabs hold of a UPA flag or a UPA banner and displays it. The Ukrainian Partisan Army, which was actually more hardcore in many ways than the Waffen-SS Galicia, at least their leadership was more overtly anti-Semitic, and they participated in numerous anti-Jewish pogroms. So this is Chrystia Freeland, the number 2, and she got away with it again. It was like, oh, she just deleted that. She always deletes everything. And
by the way, Kurt Metzger, by the way, has a joke where he says that, yes, it was wrong for Russia to invade Ukraine, but it did end COVID.
Yeah, I remember that was like kind of the upshot.
Yeah.
It was like it moved things along in our psyopathy. This is one of the most tortured answers I've ever seen from a major Western politician. And the question cuts right to the heart of who Chrystia Freeland is, as we'll illustrate.
There are calls by B'nai B'rith to reopen a report by the Duchesne Commission so that Canadians can know how many veterans who fought with the Nazis are here in our country. Will the government do so? And what is your response to that?
I don't know what to say.
Let me just start by reiterating, and I don't think it can be said too many times, how hurtful for so many people in Canada and around the world what happened was and has been and continues to be. As MPs, in our capacity as MPs, it's important for appropriate next steps in the House to be taken. And I think that is our immediate focus. And as a government, we're going to be very thoughtful about any further steps that need to be taken.
Well, she didn't say anything there. You know how when you get like, if you feel like you have to apologize to someone, maybe like in a work situation, or it's your romantic partner or whatever, or you get called to the principal in elementary school and they make you apologize, and it's like you just want to you want to say, well, I'm really sorry for the hurt that this has caused, or I'm sorry for how it made you feel, because you didn't do anything wrong, but somebody just overreacted. That's kind of what her apology is like. Like none of these officials in the Liberal Party have said, well, it just offended me. I am disgusted and I take responsibility because I didn't know. They've made Anthony Rota, the speaker, fall on his sword. And then none of them will take responsibility. And they also just say that it hurt somebody else, some other community. And then they just rattle off the names of all these different communities.
And she can't give a straight answer to the question that she got of, would you support reopening an investigation of Canada's welcoming of Nazi war criminals? Because she's personally implicated in that, right? And talk to us about that, Max, because you've done a lot of work on this well before all this blew up, about her family history, her grandfather basically being a Nazi propagandist. Well,
Kurt Metzger had another good joke, which is like, this has allowed Canada to say sorry, like S-O-R-E-Y. If you listen to the apologies, they're all like, sorry. I don't know where that comes from, but Michael Chomiak was the name that one of Hitler's top propagandists in Ukrainian occupied Poland chose when he came to Canada in the 1950s as part of the Rat Line with maybe 2,000 other SS veterans, Nazi collaborators from the Baltic states and Ukraine. And it was said that all they had to do, this is according to a Canadian historian named Irving Abella, who covered this and appeared in a 60-minute special. We'll show in a second, that all they had to do is show their SS tattoos to get into Canada at a time when Jewish immigrants, or the Jews who had been in the displaced persons camps after the war, who had lost their entire families in the genocide, were being put in barbed wire camps in Canada. There were 8 barbed wire camps filled with Jews. Some of these Nazi collaborators spent time in these camps, but they were quickly naturalized and made citizens. The Jews were seen as objects of suspicion because they were considered communists. The Nazi collaborators were considered potential strike breakers by manufacturing interests in Canada, industry, and an anti-communist shock troop to prevent the rise of socialism or the growth of socialism and communism in Canada after the war, when the Communist Party had a very good reputation because they had helped run the resistance all over Europe. So they're there. Michael Chomiak's there. He had run a paper called Krakow News, which recruited for the Waffen-SS Galicia, which celebrated Hitler, which was later determined to have fueled anti-Semitic violence, including pogroms and the clearing of the Krakow ghetto. The Krakow ghetto was formed by Ernest Gassner, who was a close ally of Chomiak's boss, whose name was Vladimir Kuboyevich. And Kuboyevich helped actually personally form the Waffen-SS Galicia, working under Gassner, who was the governor of Galicia for the Nazis. And he said this upon its formation: "This historic day was made possible by the conditions to create a worthy opportunity for the Ukrainians of Galicia to fight arm in arm with the heroic German soldiers of the army and the Waffen-SS against Bolshevism, you and our deadly enemy." Kuboyevich also came to Canada and formed the UCC, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, of which Freeland's family were members. Kuboyevich also started the Encyclopedia of Ukraine. It's available online, and gave Chrystia Freeland her first job as a researcher and journalist. She then went to work for another publication, which he was involved in, where her father had served as editor, called Ukrainian News. And here's an article she contributed to in Ukrainian News about the Holodomor, which is what Ukrainians call the Ukrainian nationalists believe this is the ultimate genocide, Stalin's forced famine in Ukraine as part of his collectivization policies during the early 1930s. She's writing about it with David Marples. And then on another page, I just put this side by side together, of the same issue, there is an ad for a book glorifying the Waffen-SS Galicia, fighting for freedom, the Ukrainian volunteer division of the Waffen-SS. Chrystia Freeland had been raised in Ukrainian nationalist youth groups, including groups that had gone to Ukraine and participated in ceremonies glorifying the Waffen-SS. She was indeed her Dado's granddaughter, following in his footsteps as a journalist all the way back to Ukraine, where, according to KGB files, which were unearthed by Canadian media, she was acting as a de facto spy, working with actual intelligence officers out of the Canadian embassy in Kiev. This is during the Soviet era, working with so-called underground forces who were Ukrainian regime change agents, and then feeding Western press with quote unquote misinformation, basically any information flow that made the Soviet Union bad. One of her closest allies there was Bill Keller, who was the editor of the New York Times, eventually became editor-in-chief. And she was doing all of this under academic cover while she was a major in Russian studies and Russian literature at Harvard. She wasn't even working a journalistic job, but she was fixing everything on the ground for all of these Western reporters who were determined to see the fall of the Iron Curtain. And that's how she set herself up for journalistic success. Through that networking, she eventually rose to global editor of Reuters, which is the largest media agency in the world. And as we exposed at the Grayzone, is an intelligence cutout for the British Foreign Office for covert operations against Russia, including the training of Russian journalists as regime change agents. We revealed that through classified Foreign Office documents. There's no disputing that that is the truth. So Chrystia Freeland then in 2013 goes into Canadian politics as a member of parliament, as a Liberal in Toronto, and her main objective was to use politics as a springboard for initiating war with Russia. That was so obvious when in 2014, she became one of the lead voices in Canada and across the West, calling for the West to arm Ukraine, to be more militant in forcing out the elected president Yanukovych during Maidan. And then 3 years after Yanukovych is ousted in a violent coup, she is made foreign minister. When she's made foreign minister, that's when independent publications like Consortium News, founded by the great late Robert Parry, which has no connection to Russia at all, it's an American publication, unearthed the past of Chrystia Freeland and her grandfather, Michael Chomiak. And Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau and that whole administration did exactly what they tried to do with Yaroslav Hunka, which is to first brand it all as Russian disinformation. And number two, she lied. She just openly lied. I mean, I could bring up the article, but just to keep it rolling, I mean, she had a spokesperson tell Canadian media, the Globe and Mail, on March 6, 2017, this is that her grandfather was not a Nazi collaborator. The next day, they published a piece in Globe and Mail, not exactly a Russian state media publication, citing an article from 1996 chronicling Michael Chomiak's role as a top Nazi propagandist. Who wrote the article? It was John Paul Himka, who is the uncle of Chrystia Freeland. And in the preface to that article, he acknowledged Chrystia Freeland's help, his niece's help in corrections and clarifications. So she knew, she lied, she was exposed for lying, and then it was all swept under the rug. And how could she not have known, given all of this history, given how deeply embedded she was in the entire Ukrainian nationalist network, that she didn't know that Yaroslav Hunka was himself a Nazi? And when you look at the image of applause, she was applauding like a seal clamoring for chum at SeaWorld or something. Like, she was so happy. It was like a rapturous moment for her. So I think this really should prompt her resignation. If we do hold Nazis in contempt still, Chrystia Freeland should be forced out of politics forever. Give her some think tank job, give her a lanyard or something, but just get her out of there, because she is perpetuating the Nazi legacy of her grandfather through this war and continuing to lie.
And there was talk of her becoming the next Secretary General of NATO, right? She really wanted that job. That was obviously something that she was going for. And
yep.
I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think politically she can survive this? She shouldn't in any normal, healthy culture, but we're so now in the thrall of neocons and neocon dogma that maybe even something like this would not be enough to sink her career. Obviously it should, but maybe becoming NATO Secretary General, I think that looks farther out of reach, because this is humiliating, no matter how hard she tries to bury it.
She should, but the Conservative Party's weak in Canada at this point. I mean, there are a lot of developments in Canada to cover. There have been huge protests against the teaching of gender ideology in Canadian public schools by Muslims who are part of the Liberal Party's base. Like, their base leans heavily on immigrants. And these are Muslim-led protests that are large, from Montreal into Hamilton, which is just outside Toronto, that are putting pressure on Trudeau. Trudeau's unpopular. He's leaning heavily on Jagmeet Singh from the NDP to his left. And Singh is in the middle of this whole other scandal, which is fascinating, where India is accused of assassinating a wanted terrorist, someone they wanted as a terrorist, who is a leader of the Khalistani separatist movement, which consists of Sikh activists. And the NDP is wrapped up in this, demanding sanctions on India, all kinds of actions against India, because its leader is Sikh. So this increases diplomatic pressure on Canada. I think India is more powerful than it's been on the world stage at any point. And one of the points they keep making is that Justin Trudeau is pushing this because he's so unpopular. By the way, Hardeep Singh Nijjar was filmed training with AK-47s at a training camp in British Columbia. It looks like he was being protected by Canadian intelligence. People in the Khalistani movement have had dinner with Justin Trudeau. So this is a separate scandal that but it does really relate to extremist elements and using Canada to advance their policies, their agenda on the world stage, and the Liberal Party kind of playing along. But like, let's go back to Chrystia Freeland. here's the scene in Parliament as she attempted to erase the record as she had before. And this, to me, really was the culmination of this entire scandal, where they tried to strike the applause and the celebration of Yaroslav Hunka from the record. And you can see her just nodding along.
Like to ask for
there she is to the left.
To adopt the following motion. That notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, the recognition made by the Speaker of the House of an individual present in the galleries during the joint address to Parliament by His Excellency Volodymyr Zelensky be struck from the appendix of the House of Commons debates of Thursday, September 21st, 2023, and from any House multimedia recording. Thank you.
See, you can see her just nodding like, let's do this. Orwell style, strike it from the record. So there's no record of me cheering. I think that independent media has played such an important role in bringing this all to the surface, and independent academics like Ivan Kachinovsky. And we just have to keep forcing the issue, because it is, as Justin Trudeau said, it is personally offensive to me. Aaron, I know your family escaped the Holocaust. It's disgusting that Canada has been so invested in protecting the people who participated in the Holocaust of bullets. Part of my family is from what is now Ukraine, and they got out like maybe a year before Stefan Petlura led pogroms in the city of Justingrad, which is like south of Kiev. They were from there. And, the synagogue they prayed in was burned. Thousands of people were killed. And Petlura himself was assassinated by a Jewish socialist named Simon Schwarzbad as revenge for that pogrom. There are streets named after Petlura all across Kiev today. He's upheld as a hero and one of the godfathers of Ukrainian nationalism. So I don't like make some performative deal about it. And I don't wear my ethno-religious identity on my sleeve. I try to think things through critically and objectively, but I can't ignore that fact. Zelensky himself tried to honor the victims of Babi Yar today, who were shot in a hole, driven out of Ukrainian towns that are now in Ukraine, and shot. Thousands and thousands of Jews, women and children, shot in cold blood and then put in a mass grave. And here it is. This is from Zelensky. So it's pretty obvious why they made this.
But has he said a word about him applauding a Nazi veteran? Nothing, right? Nothing. Because the problem is, I think, he doesn't want to actually, I mean, who knows? Maybe he's just so stubborn he doesn't want to do anything that can be seen to bowing to criticism. But also, his problem is he is now in an alliance with, and sometimes taking orders from, the followers of Nazi veterans today. I mean, people like Beletsky, who we've talked about, who Zelensky met with last month to talk military strategy. These are his key people now. And
yeah,
so can he even speak out against a Nazi World War II veteran without drawing their ire? I mean, yes, he can do these performative things, because also he's trying to keep Poland happy too, because Poland's unhappy with him right now. But can he directly denounce a Nazi veteran while not pissing off people in Azov who follow militias like that? I'm not sure. Beletsky, by the way, there's an episode in July 2019, a few months after Zelensky took office. There was going to be a Ukrainian television network doing a joint broadcast with a Russian television network to promote dialogue between the two countries at the time when the Donbass war was still raging, and Zelensky had promised to end that war. And so Beletsky, the founder of the Azov Battalion, he threatened Zelensky. He said, if you don't shut down this broadcast, we're going to do it for you, and you're not going to like it, because he's saying we're going to be armed. Like, if you don't shut it down, we're going to give you the answer to this broadcast. And he made a reference to his members being armed. So that was yet one of countless threats that Zelensky has faced from the far right, from neo-Nazis in Ukraine, for any effort that could promote dialogue, reconciliation with Ukrainians in the East and with Russia. And there's no doubt that he still feels intimidated by that today.
Yeah, and just 2 points on that. We can get it. Yeah. The Zelensky, in order to get from Kiev to the site of the Babi Yar massacre, traveled on a road that was renamed after 2014 after Stepan Bandera. So it was renamed after one of the arch Nazi collaborators whose forces oversaw pogroms, the killing of ethnic Poles. I'm pretty sure it's Roman Shukovich who oversaw the Lvov pogrom, but Bandera's forces were involved in other hideous massacres of Jews. And so they named that street for him. He's not going to rename the street. This is just performative. And the second point is Justin Trudeau has apologized to Zelensky for honoring Yaroslav Hunka. Forget about Zelensky for a second. He's just the Ukrainian leadership who leads a nationalist regime. Like, you cannot be neutral in Ukraine and give a voice to the 35% of the public or 40% that is ethnic Russian who have essentially been forced out of Ukrainian politics through this war. You cannot do that. So in many, I think it is a nationalist regime. It's fair to call it that. And why would Zelensky need an apology for the honoring of Yaroslav Hunka? I understand from a PR point of view, it embarrassed him, but that would be like a foreign leader apologizing to a US president for honoring George Washington or the Minutemen. I mean, Yaroslav Hunka was one of the founding fathers, or you could say he's one of the Minutemen of the Ukrainian nationalist regime that reigns today, whose soldiers openly pay homage to the Waffen-SS Galicia, where Waffen-SS Galicia veterans have been honored since 2014 in the streets in official ceremonies. So why would he actually need an apology? He doesn't really want an apology. It's just embarrassing because he's trying to get more weapons. And as you see what's happening in Washington, having a harder time of it than ever before.
You know, to your point about how Zelensky can't be neutral on this, he has to side with the ultranationalists. To underscore that, I've told this story before, but just briefly, when he was in his first few years of office, he appointed a friend of his named Sergei Savoko, who was also from Donbass. They worked together on Zelensky's comedy productions, and he appointed this guy Savoko to Ukraine's National Defense Council, some similar name to that. And his mandate was to promote dialogue with the Donbass. And when Savoko tried to undertake that mandate, he delivered a speech in Mariupol to try to promote having dialogue with Ukrainians in Donbass, right, to bring the country together to end the Donbass war. He couldn't finish his speech because members of the Azov battalion and their party, the National Corps, attacked him and beat him up. And Zelensky, a few weeks later, rather than standing up for his friend and now official, fired him. He let him go. And Beletsky, the Azov leader, said, "This is great. There's one less pro-Russian in the government." So that's just an illustration of how absolutely ultranationalists do control the government and have a veto through violence, as Lev Golinkin likes to say, over policy. And exactly why for Trudeau to apologize to Zelensky, it means nothing to Zelensky. If Zelensky was really sorry about applauding a Nazi, he would say so right now, but he's not. He's not sorry because he's in a de facto alliance with those people.
Yeah. So there are hundreds of hack reporters in Kiev, or as they call it, Kyiv. And the longer they say it takes them to say that E, like Kyiv, that's how long they want this war to last. They love it. And none of them have asked Zelensky about this. Have they? Like he hasn't commented.
I've seen nothing. No, I've seen nothing on this. No.
So they're protecting him.
Yeah.
And as I said at what was it? Whatever comedy club I last performed with Jimmy Dore at, like they're just telling him, some State Department officials telling him, like, we need you to not run for re-election anytime soon and cancel elections because we need a Jewish guy to cover for all this Nazi stuff. Like that's your main utility. So the U.S. is pushing him to not have elections. And who stands in Zelensky's wake? Who's next? It's the chief of staff of the Ukrainian military who posed and took proud selfies with a photo of Bandera, a Banderite. Like Zelensky is not really a hardcore Banderite. He just is taking on this role because he's an actor and he's doing what is necessary in Ukrainian politics.
Absolutely. Zelensky's wife gave an interview to CBS News last week, and she basically admitted that he's not very popular. It was a very somber interview. She was asked if Zelensky plans to run again. And she basically said, like, you know, if the Ukrainian people would want him to run again, if, you know, things, she gave a very sort of dire assessment of his prospects, maybe recognizing that his leadership has been a disaster for their country, and that if he tried to run again, despite all the hoopla in the West, I'm not, if it was a fair election, I'm not sure he would even win.
I mean, he was always a Russian speaker himself, and now he pretends like he doesn't understand Russian words. He would do performances with the Russian leadership in the audience. He's now bombing part of his base that helped him win in 2019.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why he won by so much, because he didn't put forward an agenda. Zelensky didn't say, here's what I believe in, and this is my, he just said, we're going to try to do the Minsk Accords. We're going to try to do peace. And the whole country was so exhausted with the civil war that the US was pushing and NATO was pushing, that they voted for him because they thought he'd get them out of it. And now he's bombing half the people that voted for him.
It's very similar to Obama, where Obama was like this blank canvas upon which anybody could project their wishes for the country. And that was pretty much Zelensky too. He wasn't from the corrupt elite, although he was backed by the corrupt elite, by Kolomoisky, an oligarch who also funded Azov. But, you know, he didn't come from the main factions. And he, and in the Maidan in 2014, he hadn't really taken a position, and he had still performed in the Donbass. So it appeared as if he could be someone who could bring everyone together. And look, I mean, people debate this. I do think he took some concrete steps, whatever his own motives were and his own level of awareness about the nature of the war. He did take some steps that were concrete early on, that were in the, toward peace. He signed this German-backed formula called the Steinmeier formula to implement the Minsk Accords, but he got blocked at every turn. The far right stood up to him. They had, they threatened his life, as we've talked about a lot. And he had having no political backbone and also no support from Washington, he caved, and here we are.
Well, this is a fascinating moment to use as a prism for examining the contradictions of liberalism in the West. And there's no one who better represents them than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she kind of is, in some ways, she's like the new kind of Obamaism. She embodies a new kind of Obamaism within the Democratic Party, although she will never enjoy national leadership like he did. The great Liam Cosgrove, who's our Hill correspondent at the Grayzone, caught up with AOC on the Capitol steps and asked her about this incident.
I catch you at the late
Yeah,
on the same
for
topic?
sure. Yes.
Thank you.
Quick comment for the Grayzone. Were you concerned last week when President Zelensky in Ukraine gave a standing ovation for an ex-Nazi war veteran in Canada?
Well, I mean, I think any situation like that would be looking out and going.
It is concerning.
Thank you.
She kind of like the car arrived at the perfect time there.
So it's hard to hear, but what does she basically say? She says nothing, right? She says it's concerning that this happened, but she doesn't give a clear condemnation because it's the audio is a little bit low.
Yeah, it sounded like, now that I listened to it for the 5th time, it sounded like she was saying, in a situation like that, it's concerning.
Okay. Yeah. And, look, like, what's the most good faith interpretation of that? Maybe she didn't know about it. She hadn't heard it yet. So he's learning the news for the first time. But then really, I think at that point, this is only a few days ago. So this has been out there for a while. It's pretty now widely known that Canada gave a standing ovation to a Nazi. And if you can't give a clear condemnation of that, I think that's pretty telling.
Isn't being, an anti-racist mean you have to be against racism, not just a non-racist?
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't that what
Absolutely.
Ibram X. Kendi, World Economic Forum young leader Ibram X. Kendi teaches? And
Yes.
yet AOC cannot condemn Nazis.
Yeah.
If
It's
they're
just
useful.
Yeah. Well, Max, you're talking about the contradictions of liberalism right now. Here's another one. This is an American citizen who is also trans, who has somehow gotten a job as a Ukrainian military spokesperson and constantly running interference for Ukraine's ultranationalist forces, and recently was forced to step down because they openly threatened Russian propagandists around the world with violence, saying that Russian propagandists are going to be basically face retribution. And so this led to a controversy. They were forced to step down. And the follow-up to this is that they were pranked by 2 Russian pranksters who've done this to many people now. George W. Bush, the former Ukrainian president Poroshenko, and now Sarah Ashton-Cirillo is their latest victim. And in this interview, they admit that Ukraine has been attracting Nazis and the far right from around the world.
We got a volume issue.
Let's see here. Oh, my bad.
Terrible problem with most foreign fighters here, because they are just a step above mercenaries, and they come here because all they know is warfare. And while I defend them in public, in private, I know many of them have very far right leanings. So there's some Nazi groups, and I reported this. I also know that many of them are doing this because they have no lives outside of in their own countries. And so we have security risks, and more importantly, we have morale and psychological issues, because foreign soldiers are here for the money. Most of them. Terrible problem with.
There are reasons to suspect this isn't real, because just Sarah Ashton-Cirillo's whole existence is so bizarre and freakish that it's hard to believe it's real, and that someone would admit all of this on camera, confess things that are so obviously abundantly true to us. But it is. And Sarah Ashton-Cirillo has gone and initially claimed that it was a deep fake, I guess, playing on the unreality of their own existence in order to dupe everyone into thinking this didn't happen. But the context behind this is Vovan and Lexus, who are Russian pranksters, impersonated a Ukrainian official who was kind of asking for an explanation for the gruesome tirades that Cirillo unleashed in the past few weeks, which led to their suspension. Is that what happened? Is this how it came about, Aaron?
Yeah, so these pranksters were posing as Poroshenko, I believe, the former Ukrainian president. And Sarah Ashton-Cirillo thought that they were speaking to Poroshenko, and that's where all these claims were made. And yet, after that happened, Sarah put out a video very briefly, then deleted a video claiming that the initial video where she was speaking to those pranksters, that was a deep fake. And here is that clip.
On the same day that UN investigators have found that Russian propagandists are in fact complicit in calling for and carrying out the genocide of the Ukrainian people, the propagandists themselves have stooped to a new low. Because they can't argue with the facts of my reporting, they've created a deep fake, an AI generation meant to impugn the foreign fighters that I fight with here in Ukraine. Make no mistake, while no group is perfect, these are among the bravest human beings that can ever be found. They're fighting on the side of justice and liberty, and ultimately Ukraine's liberation, because it's not only the right thing to do, because they're the right people to carry it out. I'm proud to be a foreign volunteer in Ukraine, and I'm proud of so many of the other foreign volunteers fighting alongside me. Slava Ukraini. On the same day.
So
and they were like, get that out of there.
They go from admitting in this private phone call, admitting that their fellow volunteers are Nazis and the far right and have serious psychological issues, to now claiming that video was a deep fake by Russia and these volunteers are actually wonderful, noble people. And then, as Wyatt Reed pointed out, that video claiming this was a deep fake was then quickly deleted.
And here's another part of the video that I think deserves to be watched, because again, this is a Ukrainian official who appears to have a position sponsored by the EU and the US, who comes from the US, who doesn't speak Ukrainian or Russian, but was appointed as a spokesperson of this government, which we are sponsoring, whose civil servants we're paying, whose seeds, farm seeds we're paying for.
And the reality is the Russians are not European. Russians, as Mr. Danilov was clear to say, Russians have a different culture. Russians are Asian. And ultimately, they do come from the Mongols. They do come from a grouping, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy, of people who are wanting to be slaves and want to be led just as it was from the days of Genghis Khan. And so I wish the rest of Europe and the Western world understood that Europe ends at Ukraine. And
this is crazy. I mean, it's just a racist anti-Russian tirade by an American who has no connection to Russian or even Ukrainian culture. And they're trying to appeal to the sensibility of the person they think is their boss, who's actually a prankster. And Jeremy Lafredo just tweeted this out, subtitled it, and he got a community note. Sarah Ashton-Cirillo is not Ukraine's official English language spokesperson. She was a spokesperson just for the Territorial Defense Force and was suspended. Also, she is American. Was this note helpful? No. Sources didn't. Incorrect information, opinion or speculation, misses key points, argumentative. All right, I'm submitting that. Anyway, come on. I mean, Territorial Defense Forces is one of the main wings of the Ukrainian military, and this person was appointed as a spokesperson, and they're calling Russians Mongols who want to be slaves. So very revealing exchange. Sarah Ashton-Cirillo is the gift that keeps giving. And there are a lot of questions that I have, but Aaron, I mean, what happened? Are they suspended or fired again?
I don't know the latest. I imagine so at this point. I mean, it's a lot of gaffes in such a short amount of time. But yes, I believe on the video actually they explained that there's basically they were reinstated, but then they got suspended again. So I would assume that they're not currently on the job.
You know,
oh, by the way, one thing they do say is that the order for their suspension came from New York. And I think that's a reference to the fact that at this time Zelensky was in New York. But basically, this came from up high, from Zelensky's office, because this whole thing was such an embarrassment to the Zelensky government. And I no doubt there was consultations with the U.S. on this. I'm sure that the U.S. told Zelensky's people that you have to fire this person because this is getting ridiculous. Because again, the initial thing was that they threatened violence against so-called Kremlin propagandists around the world, like everywhere, that certain unnamed people were going to face violence for spreading Kremlin propaganda.
It's all a gaffe. These are all gaffes. These are Nazi-linked gaffes. You know, like the media is calling Yaroslav Hunka Nazi-linked.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm Grayzone linked. And then they'd say that these are all mistakes that are being made as if they are not reflections of official policy. So there's certain irony to Cirillo getting pranked, although I see you put something else on screen.
Well, just here's a headline. Here's an
great
example we're talking about from Politico. Nazi-linked veteran received standing ovation during Zelensky's Canada visit. Nazi-linked, not Nazi, Nazi-linked.
Yeah, it's like there's several degrees of separation between him and the Nazis. I mean, the guy like fought for the Nazis. I guess they're just used to doing that when they smear everyone as like Russia linked. I don't know what it is. It's like this tick of today's editors. Everyone's linked to something.
Yes.
Yeah. We're like the Russian linked Grayzone. Like Every time we get smeared, they say we're Russia linked, except we're not. We're just linked to Russia by them because they want us to be linked to Russia. So if they establish some mental link, then we are. But there's a certain irony to Cirillo getting pranked, which is that they ran a sting operation as a Democratic Party operative in Las Vegas, very similar to the kind of sting operations run by the FBI to ensnare Proud Boys, the kind of extremist street gang and the gangs of New York that fights with the Democratic Antifa doofuses, and it gets them to recruits them as official Nevada GOP activists to embarrass the GOP. This is the Daily Beast, which is itself like this spook-infested neocon rag that promotes anything like this. This undercover operative says she recruited Proud Boys for the GOP. This is like, it was updated in 2021, but this like put Cirillo on the map back in like years, just right before, like a year before the Ukraine proxy war began. And this was all to embarrass Ted Cruz, a transgender poker player and progressive activist who went undercover and cozied up to right-wing extremists, a state Republican Party desperate to see Donald Trump win. This is a bizarre story connecting a far-right paramilitary group to an effort in Nevada to pressure election officials to overturn the 2020 election results. Go on, but now Sarah Ashton-Cirillo is connected to a far-right paramilitary group that's sponsored by the Ukrainian government and the U.S. and was just exposed as a foreign recruit by pranksters. But all of this raises questions about who this person is, whether they have been changing identities in order to conceal something in their past, whether they're involved in these kind of sting-like operations and then immediately gravitate to a US-run proxy war because they are an agent of sorts and have been supported by the US government. And as we mentioned like a week or two ago, when Senator J.D. Vance asked that specific question of Cirillo, Cirillo did not provide a direct answer. Are you supported by the US government? Are you working in any way for capacity for the US government? And they didn't give a direct answer. But it looks like a case of PR blowback here.
Well, if they are an op, then you have to admire the creativity, because this is like the storyline. You just couldn't write it. You could not write it. It's,
well, maybe it's a Proud Boys op to make trans people look bad.
Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? In the limited time we have left, because I'm gonna have to log off.
Well, I hope this stream isn't demonetized, Aaron.
Yeah, well, that's always. I mean, so do you want to talk about that? The last time we did a stream, we mentioned Russell Brand being censored, and so we got demonetized for that too, right?
Yeah, I'm looking for that. Here it is. So, yeah, our last stream was completely demonetized. Usually it says like limited because we mentioned Israel or something, and you're not allowed to mention Israel, which because it's anti-Semitic. Yes. I'm serious.
Yeah.
But we were fully demonetized. And here's the, because we, well, this is going to be demonetized too.
Now,
okay. Well, you know, the AI will immediately show Russell Brand was on screen, and we'll get this one demonetized too. This is what came up. Content identified in this video, which resulted in our demonetization, is listed below. And it was Russell Brand basically calling out the British government for his own demonetization. So we just played that message from him on Twitter. Video cannot be monetized. Ad revenue paid to copyright owner. And we were actually offered the opportunity to edit out Russell Brand in order to remonetize our video, but I chose not to do that.
That's
anyway. I guess I pushed the demonetization button again by showing Russell Brand's face. But I mean, what does this say about the insane censorship regime we're living in?
I mean, what's happening to him is serious. We talked about it last time.
But I mean, let's leave all that aside. I mean, it's like, we didn't say, we just talked about the British government's role.
Yeah, exactly. No, like the letter from the British government to Rumble and to TikTok, basically asking them to kick off Russell Brand. And if the fact that's playing his own statements and response anyway, I mean, that's par for the course. We're used to that. I mean, the time when we talked about Paul Mason coming up with a plot to try to like cancel the Grayzone, which we exposed based on leaked emails, that wasn't just demonetized, that was just removed, right? That was removed from YouTube, I believe.
Yeah.
They took that offline. Yeah.
I think Glenn Greenwald laid it out as clearly as possible how extreme this precedent is, because Russell Brand was demonetized by YouTube first under the orders or through the lobbying of the British government because of off-platform behavior. And I didn't know that was in their terms of service, off-platform behavior.
Yeah.
And so if it's up to them to determine whether your off-platform behavior is bad enough for you to be financially sanctioned while they continue to take 100% of the ad revenue you bring in. Like our ad revenue on that live stream is going to YouTube executives instead of us. Anyway, off-platform behavior has never been enforced before, as far as I know, on YouTube until the British government came calling, because Russell Brand is a threat to the transatlantic establishment's imperatives. One of the most popular people speaking out against the Ukraine proxy war and hosting us regularly. So he didn't get due process. These were mere allegations. They may or may not be true. But what Glenn made the point that even if you are criminally convicted, does that mean that you cannot participate in social media or in any video sharing platform because you're convicted and you did time? Because that too has not been enforced before. We've never seen that before.
Of course, you'd have to cancel a lot of people.
Yeah, anyone could then be canceled.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Jackson's been accused of sexual abuse, but his record company and his publishing is still making money off plays of his songs on YouTube. So is Michael Jackson going to be demonetized? What about Cardi B? Cardi B admitted to drugging men and robbing them when she was a stripper. So is she going to be demonetized? No, because they're not really saying anything that, I mean, I guess Cardi B endorsed Bernie, but like that wasn't like a huge threat. And
to be clear, like we don't want Cardi B to be demonetized. The whole point is
I'm saying the precedent is terrifying.
It's so hypocritical, and then of course you have all these war criminals who kill people based on their policies, who of course never face any censorship at all. I mean, it's also obvious, and it's important to speak out against it.
So, just quickly, I mean, the Times of London was the publication that dumped these allegations on Russell Brand, and they're doing it again with Roger Waters. It's the phoniest article, another smear claiming he was anti-Semitic, of course, and it's being pushed by someone who's like some former Pink Floyd producer who says like 30 years ago, Roger Waters said something about the Jews. They're putting it forward in a documentary that's produced by the Israel lobby in the UK, and that involves John Ware, who produced pro-Israel propaganda for Panorama at the BBC. He's actually being sued by some of the people he smeared in the Labour Party, and they're targeting Roger Waters. He's next on the list. Anyone who opens their mouth, who's famous against this regime, the same regime that honored a Nazi in Canada's parliament, gets branded as an anti-Semite or worse. And the Times of London is one of the favored places to do it. Who else did they smear, Aaron?
Well, I can think of many examples.
Well, like one that you've written about a lot.
Well, there's a group of British academics who have been calling attention to the ridiculousness and the lack of evidence in these chemical weapons allegations in Syria. Long before even the OPCW whistleblowers came forward, they were calling attention to this. And the Times of London viciously smeared them because, of course they did, because they'll go after anyone who's a serious critic of the establishment on these vital issues like the Syria dirty war. I'm sure there are other examples.
But it's like these academics were unknown to almost 99.99% of British people, and suddenly they show up on the front page of the Times of London. So they're not covering the news. They're putting people on the front page to be targeted and destroyed because they have interfered with the goals, the malign goals of the intelligence community and the financial establishment. I mean, that's it. And it's so slimy. So Anya Parnpill, our colleague, was in Tampa covering the trial of the People's Uhuru, which is a sort of black nationalist, very small black nationalist faction that's being put on trial as Russian agents by the US government. I see this trial as kind of in the same light as this whole discussion we're having. Or I see it in through the prism of the conversation we're having, where dissidents are being punished. But right now, the preferred mode of punishment is character assassination. Aaron, your Wikipedia page is a form of character assassination. It's been vandalized by spooks. I think it was like just created to destroy your reputation. Mine is the same. The Grayzone is the same. But if that fails, they'll just move towards good old fashioned throwing people in jail, and the mask of liberal democracy will be lifted. I know you got to go, Aaron. So,
well, should we play the ad from Bill Kristol for anyone right now who's on the fence about supporting the Ukraine proxy war? Bill Kristol has a new message for you about really why this is a wonderful thing. And oddly, it's aimed at Republicans, because Bill Kristol, arch neocon, doesn't need to go out and try to convince any Democrats to fund the Ukraine proxy war, because they're all entirely 100% on board. But there are some Republicans who are not. So Bill Kristol has a message for them.
When America arms Ukraine, we get a lot for a little. Putin is an enemy of America. We've used 5% of our defense budget to arm Ukraine, and with it, they've destroyed 50% of Putin's army. We've done all this by sending weapons from storage, not our troops. The more Ukraine weakens Russia, the more it also weakens Russia's closest ally, China. America needs to stand strong against our enemies. That's why Republicans in Congress must continue to support Ukraine.
Isn't it amazing? It doesn't even throw in a mention of Ukrainians defending Ukraine.
Yeah, it's not about that anymore, or democracy.
Yeah. But it's like he can't even pretend that that's what it's about anymore. He doesn't even feel the need to even give him like a passing mention. It's entirely about weakening Russia and also weakening China. And so whatever happens with the government shutdown, I do think we can be pretty confident that money for the Ukraine proxy war will be protected. But amazingly, I mean, even if you accept that we need to be funding this proxy war, look at how well it's going. This is from the New York Times this week about the change in control of territory this year. And blue is what's been gained by Ukraine, red's been gained by Russia. And it looks like Russia has actually gained more territory than Ukraine has this year, even though Ukraine's been doing this much hyped counteroffensive. So even from a strictly military point of view, forget the morality of fueling this war. All these tens of thousands of lives being lost, sacrificed in Ukraine for what? To gain something like 500 square miles apparently has changed hands by both sides. And it looks pretty much like a draw, maybe a little bit more taken by Russia. So that's where all this is going.
Yeah, the counteroffensive has failed. That was in the New York Times. It was sold to the U.S. as the panacea for ending this war and bringing Russia to the table. It's failed. Majority of Americans, obviously disproportionately Republican, are not on board with sending aid to Ukraine anymore. So Bill Kristol is coming out with this ad through his Defending Democracy Together, which, as we've documented at the Grayzone, is funded largely by a Democrat, Pierre Omidyar, who used to own The Intercept, and pushing war with China as the reason to fund Ukraine, because Bill Kristol's done the polling. Republicans don't like China. Democrats aren't particularly fond of China. So it's a convenient scapegoat as support for the Ukraine proxy war drifts away. And so it looks to me like we're just going to transition from this failure into an even more disastrous conflict with an even more powerful designated enemy in China over the Taiwan Strait. And it's not going to work out well economically. We're already paying a price at home. Russia is effectively sanctioning the U.S. by reducing oil output along with Saudi Arabia. in retaliation for sanctions that have been put on them. Imagine what China could do economically to retaliate against the US. It's all because of these soft-handed neocons who got us into the Iraq war, who want to get us to bomb Iran on behalf of Netanyahu's Israel. And Bill Kristol's been welcomed into the Democratic Party, and he says he's fully comfortable with the Democratic Party. That ad, by the way, was played during the Republican debates 2 nights ago. Like one of the worst debates I've ever seen, period. Like, I saw better debates in 7th grade. It was horrible. And they all dressed like Trump. Did you notice that?
I didn't see it.
Oh, man. Well, you didn't miss anything. It was just the worst debate. And other than Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a complete phony, they all sounded like George W. Bush, like that 2003 Republican that has been essentially purged by the Republican base in support of Trump. But they're all dressed in a red tie with like a suit with big shoulders. And they're reading off these pathetic lines that their consultants wrote for them, where Chris Christie's saying, Donald Trump, you don't want to debate. I'm going to start calling you Donald Duck. Like he practiced it in front of a mirror. It's just like Doug Burgum's on stage. Who the hell is Doug Burgum? And then this ad comes on and it's like, this is so yesterday, the Republican Party of yesterday, but the Democratic Party of today that worships Liz Cheney. So all that flowing into the election, all of that is flowing into 2024. This is Biden's war. We won't have time to get to it, but the Republicans are continuing with their impeachment inquiry today into Hunter Biden. And this is all about Ukraine. And it's what makes it Biden's war.
And here's the Wall Street Journal. An arsenal of weapons is being put to the test in Ukraine in what has become the world's largest arms fair. So the country's been destroyed. Tens of thousands of people have died. The world is in peril as a result of it, with higher food prices, higher oil, everything. But on the plus side, it has become the world's largest arms fair. So congrats to everyone who helped make the fair possible, especially Bernie Sanders, the squad, the entire Congressional Progressive Caucus.
Slava Raytheon.
Should we wrap it there?
On that note, I feel as disgusting as all of this was, all of this, the content of the subject of this extended conversation is from honoring a Nazi to turning a country into the world's largest arms fair as it's the flower of its youth are shoveled into a slaughterhouse to undermine Russia. As disgusting as that is, I feel good about the work that we've been able to do to at least bring this out to the public and break the media blockade on these issues. And now they're finally out there in a way that cannot be erased from the record, as the Canadian Liberal Party attempted to do. It's a tribute also to the work of sites like Consortium News, which were first on exposing Chrystia Freeland's dark family secrets.
Well, let me say, doing this book that I'm doing about Ukraine war, I've gone back and read so much of Bob Perry's old work, and at every stage, he called it exactly right. And his work should be honored. It should be taught in schools, in journalism. If we actually taught journalism in journalism schools, he would be cited. And of all the adversarial journalists that are known in this country, he should be at the top in terms of most studied, because he's so brave, he's so accurate, so clear-minded, and everything he said about the Ukraine war, everything he said about Russiagate has proven to be exactly correct. He called everything, and he exposed so much of it as it was happening. And it's too bad he doesn't get the attention that he deserves, and he passed away, I believe, and it was early 2018. Yep. So he wasn't able to see, for example, Russiagate collapse in the way that it inevitably would. And just so much of the work he did has allowed people like myself to understand what's been going on. So he deserves so much credit. And the site continues under Joe Loria, and it's a really, really valuable site.
Well, I saw Bob Perry. He was just himself, completely healthy guy at a party in town. Late 2017, I think it was like a Christmas party. And I spoke to him. He was just sitting there all alone in the basement at the party. And I went and sat next to him and just asked him about his work and why he was going so hard against Russiagate. Like, what compelled him to do that? And he said it was really the legacy of the Vietnam War and just seeing everything in light of all the lies told during Vietnam. And then he started telling me that he was completely isolated, almost completely isolated by his board members then at Consortium News, who were later removed, were supporting the Russiagate hysteria. People close to him were supporting it because they were upset that Hillary Clinton lost. And it was kind of tragic. And I remember him walking out and saying bye to me. It was the last time I saw him. He got pancreatic cancer like 2 weeks later and just quickly died. And so he would have been such an important force if he were with us today. I actually just did an interview with Bob Scheer, who's 87 years old and still going strong. And he's mentoring some great young journalists over at Scheer Post. So that's definitely another site to follow. There's a young guy named Max Jones who's writing some good stuff for them. And he came out of Bob's journalism program at USC Annenberg. And otherwise, like, journalism schools are just like conformist factories. So, but, you know, Bob Scheer was one of the legends of alternative media and helped start Ramparts, which exposed all the CIA infiltration of the college, of the student movements. And yeah, so that we're trying to carry that banner at the Grayzone. So thank you all for supporting us. We're almost like just dollars away from succeeding at our fundraiser for Kit, Alex, and Wyatt. And we'll just keep doing this into the next week as the media fails to do its job.
And if you haven't given yet, and you can, if you're able to, go to spotfund.com and just search for the Grayzone, and you can support the Grayzone there and support the work of these great journalists that the Grayzone's been putting out: Alex Rubinstein, Kit Clarenberg, Wyatt Reed. And this will allow them to continue and expand the great work that they've been doing. And I also wanted to give a shout out, a belated happy birthday to my brother Daniel, whose birthday was yesterday. And I know was watching the stream because he's a regular devoted audience member. So happy birthday, Daniel. I love you a lot. And I hope you enjoyed this post-birthday stream for you.
Happy birthday, Daniel. And we'll see you all next week. Thanks a lot for being here, Aaron. And thanks to everyone for all the support.
Peace.
Peace.